5-star weapons, signatures, and overall weapon banners are getting worse. And now, before anyone here points to the Aqua and Homa banner, I'm not talking about those signatures. What I mean is, if we're looking at the overall amount of characters we have, the signature weapons that we have, and the limited 4-star weapons that are on these banners, it hasn't exactly been getting better. Excluding the fact that limited 4-star weapons are not added to the standard banner for some idiotic reason, you run the current risk where a lot of the current banners, or even the quote-unquote signature weapons, are not good. Examples could include signatures that people don't really think of when they think of the character. You have Vortex Vanquisher on Zhongli, you have Summit Shaper on Albedo, and it is rerun with him every time he's here. Zhao and Jade Spear, Ganyu and Amos. The reason I'm listing those two in particular is because both of those are standard banner weapons that are signatures for limited characters, and not only that, they aren't even their best in slot. For Melt's Ganyu, Hunter's Path, which is Tignari's Bow, and Aqua Simulacra are better. If you're looking at Ganyu again, Aqua Simulacra, Skyward Harp, anything else is better for Ganyu because you're not only charge attacking and freeze Ganyu. For Zhao, Jade Spear, and Homa are neck and neck. The issue is, yeah, Jade Spear goes really well with Zhao's design, but at the end of the day, I don't think it should be a situation in which it can be beaten by another signature. I think it should be a situation in which if you roll for a weapon, and yeah, the crit value is nice, it should be extremely good for that one character and decent or good on the others. Aqua is amazing as a bow overall, but it's great on Yelan, 15 to 30% better. That's what I expect for a signature weapon as a damage improvement to a character. Homa for Hu Tao is great, it's exceptional. And I won't be glossing over the support ones. I don't believe it's super important to have like LGB Venti's best all the time, every time, because it's a good support bow regardless. Same with something like Freedom Sworn for Kazuha. I want to talk about the DPS ones because I do believe for most individuals, if you love a character and they do a lot of damage, you're going to pick up that signature. I don't believe many individuals are getting a J cutter for the Xingqiu. I do believe many individuals are getting a J cutter because it's a good weapon and they can slide on to somebody like Albedo, Xingqiu, you can slide on to Ayaka, anyone, Ayato I suppose. But many of you are much more inclined to go for Thundering Pulse for your Yoimiya. You're more inclined to go for something like Homa for your Hu Tao, Engulfing Lightning for your Shogun. And as such, I do believe there should be a dramatic difference in terms of what the next best option is compared to what the best option is. Like, it shouldn't be a situation where you're sitting there with like, yeah, I have Jades, but I also have Homa, which one should I use? No, just use the one that's essential for the character it is for. Like, don't get me wrong, if I'm taking a look at something like Jade Spear, which is decent enough for Xiao, the passive is nice and the crit bonus is nice, but there should be a bonus effect where if he plunges and you hit an enemy, it sucks the enemies in beneath where that plunge landed. That way you keep them grouped up. Something to add a bonus effect, and something that should dramatically get better with the constellations. And something else people really don't seem to mention is just how signatures can affect the way you play. Polar Star for a child requires you to play a certain way. Thundering Pulse for Yoimiya, it requires you to maintain below 100% energy. This does not synergize with something like Shimenawa's set, because depending on your party composition or depending on the heritage you have, even if it's just like one Favonius, because you need at least 15 energy constantly, most people who use Shimenawas won't burst. And what this means is they'll always lose one Thundering Pulse stack, which results in 24% normal attack bonus instead of the full 40%. Meaning that depending on who you are, you either have to play a very specific way to maximize Shimenawas and Thundering Pulse, or you need a high energy recharge team, or you just go for Echoes, Crimson Witch, or Bolide. And considering none of these limited weapons are being added to standard, unless you count something like Amos and Jade, which were originally there, which I still disagree with, you have the additional issue in which the signatures themselves, let's say hypothetically you roll in the current banner, and you have Beacon of the Reed Seas versus something like Scarlet Sands. Both of them have crit, and the passive incentivizes you to use it on that specific character. Sino wants Elemental Mastery, so Scarlet Sands being able to convert Elemental Mastery into attack is great, and it actually incentivizes you to use it on that character. Beacon of the Reed Seas giving HP is great for Dea, because no other Claymore character wants HP. So I've already mentioned my thoughts on 5-star weapons. For limited 4-stars, however, there's a slightly bigger issue because they're not guaranteed to be with any character. You better hope and pray you see it. If you wanted something like Zephyr's Moonlight, you better hope it's on a new banner with different 5-stars you actually want. And if we're considering that, the 4-stars need to be really good to justify the potential of getting a 5-star you don't want. And I think that we shouldn't be looking at the standard weapons for how much of an outlier they are. The Widset has been a staple for such a long time because it's so strong. Same thing with something like Stringless. These are really good standard 4-star weapons to an extent to where it makes so many other weapons look bad by comparison. Whereas if we're looking at other ones, especially limited ones, Ali Flash is only for Bennett, Ali Hunter is the bow, and that's specifically used by me at least for official. But because they're 4-star weapons, let's be honest here, nobody's using Lithic. Now, a lot of the Lithic weapons are good, a lot of Lithic and Leeway characters are great. You could only really justify a Lithic weapon though in something like a Who's How Double Hydro, or a Double Hydro with a shield like Zhongli. And especially with refinements, the weapon becomes so much better. But that's refinements on a very specific 4-star, on a very specific banner that requires you to use specific characters. So if we're looking at that, yeah, it's a good weapon in a vacuum, but it's not good enough to warrant summoning on any specific banner for it. And if we're looking at the limited series as a whole, the only ones I would say are viable, at R5 at least, would be Zivos, and that's for Kazuha, but if you have Freedom Sworn, it's just better. And that's really it. A bunch of the other claymores and weapons either rely on party member specific things or rely on very specific requirements. Ali Flash sounds good until you realize that it essentially gives you elemental mastery, and nobody is making use of the passive because that would make sense for off-field characters, but the only off-field sword user is Xingqiu and Albedo. And I think overall, there is not a form of power creep occurring in terms of weapons at least. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I do however believe that 5-star signature weapons are not getting good enough to justify pulling. If I look at my account currently, there's not a point where I can look at all the characters and say, yeah, I should get the signatures just because they're really good for them. Instead, it would be better off for me to just wait for another Homa banner or something like a Missplitter Homa banner or something ridiculous like that and just pull on that repeatedly because both weapons are so viable for my account. I like weapons that are good. I like weapons that have you play in a very specific way. Not too restrictive, but restrictive enough where you want to use the entirety of someone's kit. I don't like weapons that are so generalist they barely feel like a signature for specific characters, especially when they look bad. Thundering Pulse does not look good on Yoimiya. And this problem extends outward, not just to the original roster, not just to limited roster, not just to the event weapons, which, let me be clear, the event weapons have been declining rapidly. And when I say this, I mean either the event ones or the ones that have really niche and specific requirements. You can consider something like Kazuha's sword from History Quest, the end of the line bow, which many people probably don't even have, and you have something like Missive Wit Spear or the new Claymore. These are niche, but they're not on par with something like Festering Desire, which was great, or the Luxurious Sea Lord, which is great for a Eula or a Beto. Oathsworn Eye, which is good for a Yai or something like Kokomi. Those were good event weapons. How many of you are using Missive Windspear? How many of you are using something like the new Claymore on anyone other than a Bergen Dea? And I think at this point, you probably get where I'm going at. A lot of the newer, recent things, not just weapons, but characters as a whole, and even events. I'm going to be honest, this year's Lantern Rite did not hit like last year's Lantern Rite. This year's Windbloom was pretty mid, and by mid, I mean bad because we've only had like 2 or 3 of them. It was not it, I'm not gonna lie, it was not it. I feel like at this stage, and I was talking about this relatively recently, but I feel like Genshin at this stage isn't treated to the same sort of respect that Hoyoverse gives to Honkai. Because Genshin is the most popular, well-known, and highest grossing gacha, at least at the moment. But it gets treated like it's the kind of forgotten younger sibling. And I think it's unfair, but I want to hear your thoughts on the weapons, on power creep as a whole, on all of these things. I know this video focused on weapons, but I think constellations are an entirely separate issue, and I can't really go into that here unless you want a 16-minute long video. Which, if you want that, it'll be probably out on Wednesday, so consider subscribing for that one. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye!